Hello all, this is part 2 video of the disassembly for the WE Airsoft FN Herstal SCAR L Mark 16 Mod 0 AEG. In video 1 we went through the disassembly of the AEG itself from a whole weapon right down to the gearbox. In this video we're going to be focusing just on the gearbox itself, notably disassembling it. I've got some points to point out to you on what can break in this weapon and what I have broken in this weapon, and then the reassembly of the weapon, as well as the tools you'll need to do this properly. Now for the legal stuff. As I'm sure as you can see, this is only a gearbox. It cannot be made or adapted to fire live ammunition. Just follow the local laws of your land and don't be waving these around in public, especially in this day and age. The tools you'll need to disassemble this gearbox are a crosshead screwdriver of any sort. I've got a particularly long-necked one, doesn't matter if it's short or long for this gearbox. And you'll also need something to hold the gearbox spring guide down. In this case I am using a hex key wrench, which has about the right thickness so that it fits down the back without any difficulty. As I mentioned in a previous video, before actually undoing any of these screws on the gearbox, my advice is firstly, use onto this side, use something to press this down. This decompresses the spring inside and releases all the tension in the gearbox, especially that main spring. Last thing you want to do is popping this open and the main spring still compressed down. That could result in damage to your gearbox. So make sure you do that first. And using your crosshead screwdriver, you'll want to now take off these 4 top screws as well as the 4 lower screws. Points to note: the top screws here are short and round headed. The 2 screws here and here are long and round headed, and the 2 screws here and here are long but sort of cone or bevel shaped. With the screws all removed from the gearbox casing now, the next thing to do is to pop a tool into the rear of the gearbox, but what you need to do is you need to ensure the tool is not too long and not too short. By too long I mean something like this long neck screwdriver that I've been using. As you can see, it's much too long, and that putting it down the back of the gearbox will mean it will strike the piston head before it actually reaches the back of the gearbox here, and you'll end up with this inch gap at the back. And that will make it hard for you to close the gearbox if you have that gap on the end there. Conversely, you don't want something too short. You want a tool that will reach probably somewhere around here inside the cylinder, such as this. And that fits in all the way back. But you don't want it too short, otherwise it'll be difficult to keep control of all the components of the gearbox, including the cylinder and the spring guide inside the gearbox when you're trying to close this. Next point, the bushings, you want them when you're opening this gearbox case to remain with their respective gears. And the reason for that is because each and every single one of these bushings has a shim, which are these small little disc spacers. If you was to open the gearbox case and have the bushings and the shims, which have a tendency to stick to the bushings due to grease and various other things, you will lose a decent job and you will have to re-shim the entire gearbox again. Now, it took me the best part of an hour to shim this gearbox the last time, so I recommend you keep it, once you've got a decent shim in, you leave it all in together and you do not let them move around. Now, this gearbox likes to be opened from the front to the back, and I do this by wedging a tool such as this into a hole that is fitted just there underneath the hoop, and you more or less pluck it upwards and it will open forward front first. Put a finger here to stop the cylinder from popping up, because it wants the tendency to do this, to come up towards you, and that's because of the spring. So we'll do that now, and you need to do what I call a bit of finger ballet in order to keep it all together. Once you've opened it, pop the spring guide out to release the tension. It's the first thing you want to do, and let go. Okay, so that's the gearbox fully opened, and as you can see inside, it is pretty much a standard version 2 gearbox. Some parts in this gearbox have been changed by myself in order to improve performance and or improve durability and reliability inside it. So we're going through this gearbox from the front, working our way to the back, and then going from the tappet plate downwards. So starting at the front, we've got the air nozzle. Now the stock WE air nozzle is plastic and it has no rubber washer. I've replaced it with one that is plastic and has a rubber washer at the same time. The cylinder head is on this, what you're seeing here is the stock cylinder head by WE. Now I've kept it stock as I find very little difference between different cylinder heads and would only replace it if it broke. The only thing I've done in addition to WE is I've used some PTFE tape, such as this stuff, which is you'll find in most hardware stores for plumbers. And all I've done is I've wrapped it around the rubber O-wash here so that it improves the air seal. You then have a cylinder, which is here, and underneath the cylinder you have a port there, and that's to improve volume balancing. Parts I have changed on the piston is the piston itself and the piston head. The piston head on this one is the GMP explosive piston head, and this piston itself is a G&G reinforced piston. Now you're probably wondering why have I changed these over, and I'll go to that in some detail later on. The spring here is a GARDA SP110 spring, and the reason I've changed that is because this is the original spring. That was in the AG, and I want you to compare that to a M100 spring by GARDA. Again, the reason I've changed it is the stock spring was only shooting around 260 to 280 FPS, which in terms of the UK power limits and requirements is pretty low and rubbish. Putting an M100 spring in this weapon brought the FPS to probably about 300 to 310. In the end, what I did is I replaced it with an M110 spring, which is this one here, and that brought the FPS to about 400. What I've since done is I've clipped about 4 or 5 coils off the top of the spring inside. As you can see there, it's clipped at the top, and that brought it down to 360. Now I've mentioned on several occasions that this weapon is very, very hop sensitive, and at 360 with a slight adjustment on the hop we can bring that down to 340, 345, which is within the UK FPS limit. The spring guide on the back is made of metal. It has a single washer on the back, which is decent enough. It's a version 2 spring guide, nothing special. There's no ball bearings though, which is a bit disappointing. Working our way through the rest of the gearbox, we have the tappet plate, the tappet plate spring, which is connected to this little pole there. That hasn't changed from the stock. We have the trigger contact and trigger, as well as a safety lever there. Again, that's all stock from this weapon. The only complaint I've got with the trigger contacts is the screw which holds it down, which is fitted right about there. You may or may not be able to see it because it's quite dark. That chewed its own threads out when I opened it. So when this gearbox is closed, basically it's just the closure of the gearbox that's keeping this together. But it works. And now we move on to the gears, which is where all the trouble with this gearbox started. Now you may notice that the gears don't look the same as your stock gears if you've opened your SCAR this far at this time. You will notice that written there are the letters G&G, and this is because this is a G&G original torque gear set, which I had to purchase after I got rid of the original WE Airsoft gears. So you're saying, why did you change the gears? Well, sector gear, spare gear, bevel gear. These are the original 3 gears that was fitted in this AEG. The metal is actually not a very high quality one, and is not as good as the G&G gears themselves. Okay, this is a standard bevel gear by WE Airsoft. It's pretty much standard. Not that bad actually compared to the other two, but you can probably just make out some chipping from the gears itself, which I would attribute to WE's poor shimming. The only thing I'll say is probably the only advantage that this has got, or pro that this has got over the G&G gears, is more anti-reversal latch teeth. I think there's about 8 on there compared to the 6 on the G&G ones, but that makes very little change for me, and overall I wouldn't say it's better than the G&G ones. The next gear is the spur gear. Again, made of poor metal, pot metal, and you could probably, if you can, just make out that there's metal chipping again where the gears make contact there. Nothing different from the G&G ones. They all match the same number of teeth. So this gear is okay, but I wouldn't say it's better than the G&G one. Okay, this is a sector gear, the last gear, and this is where all my trouble started. The sector gear, again, made of metal, not as good as the G&G ones. So you were asking, why did I change the gears over? And the reason being is I fitted a MOSFET to this weapon using a 7.4 LiPo, shot a few shots of semi-auto, fine, not a problem. Switched it to automatic, fired a couple of rounds of burst, and I heard a loud pop noise. Wondering, oh heck, what the hell has just happened? I stripped the weapon down to the gearbox and found, on checking it, that the sector gear had stripped some of its teeth. And as you can see, it's stripped about 3 or 4 teeth from the sector gear there. Now that stripping of teeth also damaged the piston teeth themselves underneath at the main rack in the center there. And so because that happened, I couldn't use those gears as they wouldn't mesh well with the G&G ones. And because the piston teeth had been stripped, I couldn't use a piston either. I could have used the piston head, however, for whatever reason, WE had used an ungodly glue to the screw inside the piston head, and I could not remove that with all the force in the world, and ended up chewing the screw up. And I thought there's no point trying to rescue that, so I just threw that away. As with this video, although it's a disassembly, it's also a word of warning. If you do own any WE Airsoft AEGs, I'd recommend you straight away open those up, do a proper shim job on them, and get it done so that the gears mesh correctly. And I only say that because when I inspected WE's shimming inside the gearbox, I found that they only use 0.3 and 0.5 millimeter shims, and I know that because I used a micrometer such as this one, and that reported only 0.3 and 0.5. There was a lot of play side to side with the gears, so not a very good shim job from WE. Right, so the last bit you've probably noticed is that the wiring in my gearbox will be completely different to yours if you have your SCAR open at this time. And the reason for that is because I've upgraded the wiring, and I've also fitted a MOSFET. And all that is I've got an additional set of trigger contact wires that skip the trigger contacts for the battery and motor and go straight to the contacts themselves and then back out again. Whilst the battery wires go straight to the motor and then back again. So really, it's not much of a difference for you, but unless you're fitting a MOSFET, keep it the same way as it is if you're happy with that. The last point we'll mention is the anti-reversal latch. It's a standard version 2 gearbox anti-reversal latch fitted in there. The only bit that you might have to take care into account of is the decompression lever, which is on the other side, but that's just a little nub that sits in the way of the anti-reversal latch, and it's quite easy to just avoid it and just flick the spring back on top. If you don't know how to put the anti-reversal latch back on, do look it up on YouTube. There's plenty of videos. If you find it keeps popping out and is infuriating you, I suggest you use something like a very strong magnet underneath it to hold it in place. But so far I found this one not to be any difficulty, and will actually just hold its place just by itself. Before you start any reshimming, re-greasing and putting back together of this gearbox, you'll have to clean it out of WE's original grease, which isn't very good quality stuff. You will need a toothbrush and an old cloth of sorts. You clean out the gearbox by using one of 2 solutions. One is water and washing up liquid, or detergent for those who are overseas. And you can use that to basically just remove the grease and use a toothbrush on the gears to get into all the nooks and crannies, and then use a cloth to dry it up. The only problem with that is you have to ensure that the gears are dry, and that could mean waiting up to an hour if you've put all the parts onto a radiator. The alternative, which I use, is to get proper degreasing spray, and the reason I use that is I can spray it onto the individual parts. Again, use a toothbrush to get into all the nooks and crannies, wipe off the excess with a cloth, and then I can more or less carry on going. I don't have to wait for it to dry because this stuff dries very, very, very quickly. So we've cleaned the parts. All the gears are nice and clean. They're all removed of WE's original crappy grease. And now you want to shim the gears. Now I recommend before you start shimming, you actually get some grease and apply it to the gears first. A lot of airsoft shops in the UK will sell you this stuff, which is Abbey gun grease LT2, and whilst it's sufficient for the job, I find that this grease is very gooey and sticky. As you can see, it doesn't actually flow when I put it upside down. I don't like this grease because it's, as I said, it's very sticky and gooey, and I think it reduces the rate of fire within the gun. What I prefer to use is white lithium grease, and the reason being that is it allows the gears to more freely spin and whilst lubricating them still. A point of note, if you do use white lithium such as this, is not to spray it directly into the gearbox, because it does come out at very high pressures. Instead, what I do is I spray it onto a piece of card and then use a small hobby paintbrush and apply it directly to the gears themselves, so it's more controlled. Finally, for the O-ring or O-rings, which is on the end of the piston head as well as on the air nozzle, I prefer to use a bit of silicone gun oil, and in this case it's Abbey silicone gun oil, which I find is fairly sufficient to do that and that inside there. And that's it really, and that's the greases you should use. If you want to see any videos regarding the absolute disassembly as well as where parts go and in what places within a gearbox, YouTube has plenty of very good videos as to how to do that, and very informative. I'm not going to go over that, otherwise it will make the video very long. We're now going to put the gearbox back together again, and so we know how it goes back together. First thing we'll do is put the piston and a piston head back inside, making sure it lines up with its runners. Pop the spring and the spring guide back on. Pop your tool in the back. Get the other half of the case. Push all the gears down. Make sure everything's seated nicely. Nothing's popping out. And putting a finger there, close the back. Holding the cylinder down, grab the case, bit of finger ballet, and seeing it down. With the gearbox back together again, both sides, we'll now start to screw it down, and remember, we've got a lot of screws to go through, so I'm going to cut to the screws already being put in. And there you have it, that's the whole gearbox put back together again. In the next video we'll be going through the reassembly of the weapon, as well as how to put certain things where, especially these selector switch gears, which I've only got 3 in my hand there, but because that bit can be a bit fiddly. But other than that, everything else is pretty much straightforward and pretty much a backwards working of what you've done to take it all apart. So, like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, leave a comment in the comment section down below if you have any feedback, questions or queries, and I'll do my best to answer them. And as always guys, thank you for watching.